I am pleased to present our next presenter today is Mike Anissimoff from Canadian Wildlife Service, and today is going to be speaking to us about bat conservation at a federal level. So welcome, Mike.
Hi, everyone. I see the title screen is a little bit messed up, so we'll see if it's going to work out. But anyway, I'm Michael Anissimoff. I am a wildlife biologist with the Environment Climate Change Canada, Canadian Wildlife Service. I am honored and delighted to be here with you today and to speak with you on this traditional and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And I offer you my most authentic self, and I look forward to bringing you interesting information and to talk to you about this unique ecosystem. And it's governed by its traditional stewards. So thank you. So where are we going here? Green button. There we go. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I mentioned I'm a wildlife biologist. I am also the chair of our federal bat conservation working group, and I manage our bat file at the Canadian Wildlife Service. And you just heard from Charles Francis, and Charles works in a different branch. So we have Canadian Wildlife Service and Science and Technology branch. So we work together on bats. And so the purpose of this talk here today is to provide you with an overview of the roles and responsibilities of the government when it comes to bat conservation. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the issues. We're going to talk about emerging zoonoses, white nose syndrome, obviously, and wind turbines. And then we're going to get into a bit of our bat programming at Canadian Wildlife Service. And then we'll talk about sort of what work we're doing on and what the future holds. So this topic needs no introduction. We're well aware of the impact of this pathogen across the landscape. So we saw in 2014 that three Myotis species were listed as endangered under the Species at Risk Act. And so within the normal process that Charles mentioned here, within a year, a recovery strategy was written in 2015, and it was again updated in 2018. And then, so our work that we're working on right now, some of the activities are with Yordi Seegers and the Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative. You saw the map before, and so that's a lot of the coordinated efforts on the part of CWHC and a lot of your data, so that's great. And then we're obviously working to continue surveillance of white nose syndrome and other emerging zoonoses across the landscape, and then obviously we're trying to identify and protect important roosting sites. And that point there about the identification of important roosting sites, you'll check out section 7.2 of our recovery strategy, details the important, like the schedule of studies for identifying critical habitat. And then Charlie, what's the other one, the above, not section 7.2, but the other section with residents, or?
With residences,
yeah.
Like the description of what a residence is.
Yeah, there's more. In section 6.2, I believe, there's another a good table of things to look for, and so that's kind of the work we're interested in, and that's the rationale as to why we do what we do, and why, for instance, if you're wondering why we're doing the work, that's the rationale is there. And then so yeah, we're working to understand distribution and movement. And then so when it comes to emerging zoonoses, this is another thing our unit's interested in, and so we work on avian influenza, chronic wasting disease, white nose syndrome, and then broader implications of zoonoses across the landscape. And so quite interestingly, in between 2008 and 2014, over 500,000 kilograms of bat guano was imported into the country from places like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Madagascar, Ecuador, and the United States. And so what's fascinating about that is 95% of that guano went to British Columbia, 95% of that guano went to Grand Forks, BC. And there's major fertilizer companies in Grand Forks, BC. There's also a lot of cannabis production in Grand Forks, BC, but I'm not making any connection there. So what's fascinating, though, is that we did an initial literature review, which revealed that over 53 known pathogens are found within bat guano. 92% are present in Canada, and then you can see how 96% are a threat to wildlife, and 88% are a threat to human health. And so, what happened after 2014? I talked to Canada Border Services. I've got all their import manifests, which was the equivalent around over 220,000 lines from 18 keywords alone. So I went through all the import manifests. I figured out, okay, which keywords are most closely associated with bat guano. And then of those keywords, I pulled out all the import manifests. And then we found out that an additional 200,000 kilograms of bat guano had come in post-ban. And 60,000 kilograms of something called mineralized phosphate, which is what bat guano turns into way down the road over time in caves. And so because of this, we are doing a risk assessment right now, and that's just getting started. But we were successful in obtaining a customs notice, which is permanently banning bat guano at the border. So, migratory tree bats, as Charles mentioned, turbine-associated mortality is decimating our migratory populations. And obviously, the Coast-Seward status assessment showed us by how much. And so, the recommended status is obviously endangered. So, what happens next? This is a quick glimpse of the process. And so, quite simply, there's an assessment period, then followed by a listing, then a recovery planning stage, and then implementation. The key word here is if they are listed. They're not listed yet, so you can see where that red box there on the left, that's where we are right now. And so we just finished 2 separate sessions of Indigenous engagement to hear from Indigenous communities across the country with respect to our duty to consult. And then so here's a little idea about the timeline of what happens next. So you heard me mention it with the Myotis species. So if the bats are listed, then there's a 1-year period where we have to write a recovery strategy, and then implementation and activity begins. Right, so we're working to, what are we going to do in the meantime? So I'm currently writing some beneficial management practices for wind energy, and it's going to be part of a BMP series that will also include bats in forestry, bats in mining, and bats in buildings. And so part of that is to work and coordinate internationally. So we obviously want to consider the United States, Mexico, but then also our European partners to see what they're up to. And so if you haven't already, I'd like you all to read Bethany Thurber's paper from last year, which was very fascinating, discussing the economic impacts of operational curtailment in Ontario, and it'll show you that it's not so expensive. I think it boils down to, per wind farm, the price of a $80,000 truck, so not so expensive. But so here, this is where the action is, and so this is kind of everything we're up to at the moment. And so I mentioned I'm the chair of our Federal Bat Conservation Working Group, but what does that mean? So we're doing all this work, and there's a lot of coordination and a lot of effort on your part, but then we're also trying to be better as a government and trying to work on bats finally. And so that's really exciting for us. But to give you a quick example of some things of how this works. So like our permitting team, for instance, I came across a permit that there was 1,000 hectares of habitat mowed down, and the species in question was northern myotis. And then so I was talking, and the way the government works is we're not prescriptive. So we let the proponent provide the mitigation strategy to us, and then we assess if it's effective or not. At the time, I didn't see the permit, and so the proposed methodology that was accepted was bat houses for northern myotis. Northern myotis don't use bat houses. So it's a 10-year monitoring program for bat houses with respect to northern myotis in 1,000 hectares of forest that was mowed down. So you don't need to be a scientist to figure out that that's not a very effective mitigation strategy. So I've been meeting with our permitting team, and you'll be happy to know that we're trying to standardize everything. So for instance, if you're a proponent, you come to me and you have a permit to do something, well, now I'm going to say, okay, well, Here's standardized data sheets for what we're about to ask you to do, and here's your data collection, and then here's a centralized repository to deposit your data so that we can all use it and see it. Because what happens is when I get a COSIWIC status assessment, when I read the document, all it says is data deficient. And you heard Charles earlier say empowered by data. Data deficient means I'm not empowered by any data because I don't have a collective voice, because it's all novel research. And a lot of it is one-off. So we need to come together to be more coordinated with our approach to bat conservation, because that's what bats need. And unfortunately, when it comes to the government and industry, you're well aware that those two entities, myself, are anything but perfect. There are blind spots, and we can only do so much with the capacity that we have, but people aren't asking in the right way. Please start asking in the right way and empower me with data, and then we can get some more stuff going. And so that was what Charles was talking about coordination and collaboration and bat hubs and really having a collective voice. And that collective voice should and must include Indigenous communities across the country, because there is a lot of good work, and we're going to hear about a lot of that today, but there's a lot of good work in the mix, and we need a way better coordinated effort. And so you'll also hear from Derek. We have we've already solved one issue. Well, we think we solved one issue when it comes to bat marking data. So now we have a centralized repository for bat marking data. Hopefully we'll get, we'll be able to put all your tagging and tracking data somewhere and get everything going, and then we'll be able to have coordinated reporting. Because conservation is different than academia. And so when it comes to coordination, we need to kind of let our guard down a bit. We need to get the urgency up to a level where we're not unreliable, because I'm telling you that the government and industry is at a level of urgency that is bordering on unreliable on the southern end. So we need to get everyone together and talking so that we're all on the same page moving forward, because it's not that the industry or the government doesn't want to participate. Everyone's ready to go. People just need to start talking in the right way to one another. And so that's why this is so important, meetings like this. But then we're going to have a coordinated approach in the future. And so I urge you, when you're thinking about your projects, think, what is the punchline? What am I saying? And if it's with respect to conservation, you need a message. And the stuff I'm trying to work on here has regulatory hooks. So I'm trying not to work on stuff that's kind of like a microhabitat association between a Myotis species or like on an island off the coast of Vancouver Island, right? How does that apply across the country? And so this is where it's important that we have this coordinated message and not wasting data and wasting our time when it comes to conservation versus, let's say, academia. And that's not a cut at academia, that's just reality. And so, yeah, and all this is, we're trying to do it in a One Health context. And so a One Health context is actually all-encompassing. So we have to think about all the 3 pillars of sustainability, obviously. And that's about it. So I've left some time for questions. Please reach out to me. I love talking bats. If you want to talk to the government about bats, please reach out to me or Charles, and we'll put you in contact with the right people, or we'll just set up a meeting and have a good time. Thank you.
Any questions? I have the microphone. Sorry, can you put your hand up? I'm a little vertically challenged. Okay, thank you.
Oh, right.
You're not alone. I couldn't see the screen.
Alrighty. So I was just curious, because Charles Francis said ECCC wasn't willing to put their name behind the project that he mentioned as well, that North American representatives all made together. You're seeming to say something quite the opposite for CWS. Are you saying that CWS would be willing to back something about coordinated data?
No.
And put their name on it? Because otherwise, can you really...
So there's a lot that needs to... Oh, sorry. So what Charles is saying is correct. And so what I'm saying is this is what we're working towards. But based on what I was showing you with what we're... If I can go back. With what we're working on, this has that in mind. And so we're working towards something. And so, no, the government probably can't support that in the way you think, but there are mechanisms that we can support. We only can work with the mechanisms that we have and the policies that we have. So unfortunately, when it comes to bats, and like they're so complex, but within bat policy, it's very siloed. So what Charles said is correct, and what I'm saying is we aspire to that. We're trying to get to this level, because bats have been on the side of everyone's desk for the last 10 years, and here we are. We have trouble with our species, and now we're having trouble with migratory species. Now we're making a push.
Would you be able to speak to sort of the difference and the gaps that happen between the coordination between the federal and the provincial piece? Because functionally, a lot of the protections for these species end up being provincial, so federal policy is limited to federal lands. And I'm curious to see, I know with migratory birds, we have really good coordination between federal and provincial efforts, but is there any vision to kind of help bridge that gap and translate the efforts on the federal side to tangible provincial protections?
Absolutely. So you can see number 2, the second bullet there is the jurisdictional migratory bat group. So we just started that, and that's led by Jordi Seegers, and I'm the temporary chair at the moment until we find a jurisdictional chair that wants to participate. But so far it's great that they are allowing a federal presence in the room to have those conversations. But yes, bats are jurisdictional responsibility, so provinces and territories and Indigenous nations across the country. And so I said I'm writing a BMP at the federal level. So that's for bats on federal lands, which is very minimal lands across the country with respect, especially with respect to where wind turbines are, for example. And so all the action happens in the jurisdictions. And so when I write a BMP, what I'm hoping is to set my bar at a level of urgency that the community wants to see that's good for the bats, not be unreliable. And my hope, and all I can do is hope because it's voluntary, because it's not my jurisdiction, is that the jurisdictions come in somewhere under my bar, somewhere in there, hopefully as close as possible to my bar. And so with respect to the conversations that we're currently having, the jurisdictions are interested in helping bats. These conversations just haven't happened as intensely as they are now, and we're now riding a pretty good wave, and I hope people realize that we are on a good wave, but I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 2-3 years, politically as well, and so if there's a new government, who knows what that looks like for bats. And so I urge people that the time is now. You've got 2-3 years. Let's work together. Let's coordinate, and let's do some bat conservation. And as far as the jurisdictions go, yeah, and there is coordination with industry from the jurisdictions. There's actually, I've heard in Alberta, there's some really cool monitoring and some simulations going on with the province and the industry as well in terms of movement.
Oh, test. We have a few more minutes if anyone has a question for Mike. Yeah.
So you were talking about a generalized lack of data and how we need to up the urgency. I was just wondering if you could speak to if there are any areas or topics of research specifically you would recommend really get bumped to the top of the list with things researchers to look into now.
So I think we actually have way more data than we need. It's just there's no coordinated voice and the data is not standardized. And for instance, you heard about acoustics. And so one person's, analyzing their data one way and another person's analyzing their data another way. And then there's no then if you were to put those projects together and have the coordinators talk to one another, like, we don't know what our data says to each other because we're not all processing in the same way. Like, passes per species, per night, per season is a good way, but not everyone does that. And so there's a lot of data where just the data's not talking to one another and it's not standardized. And so in terms of knowledge gaps and things that we're working towards and filling those knowledge gaps is section 7.2 of the recovery strategy. If you look in there, you'll see a whole bunch of basically distribution and monitoring and a few other habitat information. Yeah. Did that answer?
We have 1 minute left. Does anyone, last question maybe? Everyone's satisfied. Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. That was
Get your
great.
data
Thank you.
together.